There's really no escaping doing the hard thing. You can't use power to try to make things easier, to try to control how other people feel about you. You have to just do the hard thing. Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Catherine, I am a licensed therapist, and this is the space where anime and human psychology intersect. The male loneliness epidemic has become somewhat of a punchline in some circles of the internet, and that's understandable when said epidemic is often used by red pillars to justify their misogynistic beliefs. But there is a real social issue of men feeling isolated. Different studies come to different conclusions about whether men do actually feel more lonely than women. But I think even if loneliness is not a problem that is unique to men, men do need solutions for it that address the unique challenges they face, such as the conflict between expressing their emotions and the pressure to live up to an unrealistic expectation of masculinity. Remember, patriarchy hurts everyone. It hurts men and women to different degrees and in different ways. Today, I am going to make the case that Mob Psycho 100 offers men and boys a roadmap out of loneliness and into community. The story showcases what can happen when men and boys face loneliness, isolation, and fears of rejection, and deal with those things in unhealthy ways. And what are some better options for how men and boys can build confidence, resilience, and community. I'm excited for this one, y'all. Let's get into it. I want to begin this analysis not with our protagonist, but with Reagan Arataka. There's no question that Reagan is lonely. There's a whole episode called Poor Lonely Whitey, where we see the clear, sad picture of his life outside of work. No friends, no genuine connection with anyone. The only people he hangs out with are the schmucks at this dive bar, but he doesn't have a genuine connection with them because he kind of sees them as being beneath him. I'll come back to that point later. Being a scam artist is an attractive job for Reagan because he doesn't really have a full, authentic self to bring to the table. He's kind of an empty shell of a person, just drifting along in the current of life. No real calling, no concrete sense of identity, only a series of masks that he's tried on and discarded because none of them felt quite right. He left some dead-end office job without having an idea of what he wanted to do next. I think because he was searching for a sense of purpose. There's a good amount of research that shows that having a sense of purpose contributes to better health outcomes, both when it comes to mental health and physical health. I also found this study that was done in Japan in 2024 that found that mattering, the sense of being important to someone or something, was correlated with lower levels of loneliness. And Reagan seems to be struggling with both at the same time. He lacks a sense of mattering and a sense of connection. This brief clip of the office environment where he worked, with its endless water coolers and people reciting scripted responses on phone calls, clearly paints a picture that this is not meaningful work. Reagan wants to actually make a difference in people's lives. What's interesting about him is that even though his moral character is questionable, I think he does have a genuine desire to help people. And what's ironic is that even though he is running a scam, he is actually helping a lot of his customers. Because a lot of them aren't actually being haunted by spirits. They just need someone to get the knot out of their shoulder, or they need someone to say something or do something that puts their mind at ease. And a lot of them leave feeling better because Reagan has a way of making people feel reassured. He's almost stumbled upon what his talent actually is. He just hasn't figured out an ethical way to make use of it. Reagan's stint as a fake psychic was not supposed to last very long. He kind of gets bored with it after a year and is about to call it quits until Mob shows up. On the surface, it seems like Reagan opts to continue the scheme because he now has a pawn that he can use to bring in more profit. And I think that's part of it. But I think the other part of it is that He actually really values the connection he has with Mob. The first moment where he gave Mob advice, he could sense how Mob was really affected by that. And this is the kind of work that Reagan actually wants to do. He likes the idea of really helping someone, even if he is misrepresenting himself in the process. The advice Reagan gives Mob isn't particularly poetic or revolutionary. Just because you have powers, it doesn't mean that you're special. Focus on being a good person and everything will be okay. A fortune cookie could have told you that. But as it turns out, this is exactly what Mob needed to hear. People treat Mob differently because of his powers, and that kind of makes him feel othered, makes him feel like an outcast. For someone to tell him that he's normal, that he's just like everybody else, that's incredibly reassuring for him. Especially when Mob didn't have anyone else to talk to at that time in his life. He really felt alone and isolated with what he was experiencing. It was comforting to be in the presence of somebody who understood him, even if it was a lie. Now, as he gets older, Mob is starting to realize that he too is adrift. No real interests, no friends, no dreams, just like Reagan. As Mob tries to search for some kind of goal or intention that he can orient himself to, the only thing that he can really think of is wanting to confess his love for Tsubomi. But he feels like he needs to work on himself before he can do that, thus beginning his fitness journey with the Body Improvement Club. While it starts out as just a punchline, the Body Improvement Club remains a fixture throughout the story because it's a quintessential example of what it can look like for young men to be in a healthy community with each other. It may have started out as just a way for Mob to try to impress the girl he has a crush on, but he actually ends up gaining a lot of confidence from being in this group, because all of the guys are so encouraging. That plus the fact that simply being in this club gives Mob practice socializing, and he learns that he really can make friends. I'm about to get really meta here, but I watched Mob Psycho 100 right after I finished My Hero Academia, and it kind of felt like Endeavor got reincarnated as this nice guy. There's something very poetic about the voice actor who plays the character who is the epitome of toxic masculinity reappearing to play a character who is an archetype of healthy masculinity. Patrick Seitz, if this video ever makes it to you, email me. I would love to interview you. The Body Improvement Club doesn't just serve as a consistent source of motivation and support for Mob. It also becomes a space where the reformed thug Tenga Onigawara can work on himself and apply himself to something constructive. I think this is meant to exemplify how all types of boys need community, structure, and positive goals. Mob and Onigawara are different types of losers. One quiet, awkward, and averse to violence, and the other picks fights because he's not really good at anything else. And they both come to the Body Improvement Club to work on themselves. Now, this is not me saying that fitness is the only way that men and boys can build confidence and form community. There's so many ways that that can be done. I think that it would have worked if this was any other type of club. But I think the bit works really well because the Body Improvement Club kind of combines together this stereotypical strongman type of character with gentleness and sensitivity to create an idea of what healthy masculinity looks like. Anyway, as Mob gradually comes out of his shell, makes friends, and improves his confidence, he starts to pull away from his relationship with Reagan. And Reagan gets very agitated by that. Not just because he's been relying on Mob to keep his scam business running, but because Mob is his only friend. And when he's on the verge of losing his only friend, he engages in a lot of manipulative tactics to try to prevent Mob from abandoning him. He even lashes out with insults when he sees that his tactics are not working. Reagan projects a lot. If you haven't already heard me define this in other videos, projection is a psychoanalytic concept that refers to when someone attributes their own feelings to someone else So if I feel angry and I say, you feel angry, that's projection. Reagan thinks Mob can't possibly have any real friends because Reagan doesn't have any real friends. He sometimes spends time with these people at the dive bar, but he kind of thinks that all of them are losers. But he only thinks that because he himself is a loser. He thinks Mob must miss him so terribly, but he's the one who's missing Mob terribly. But this is a separation that kind of needs to happen. Mob's decision to distance himself from Reagan indicates that he is maturing and feeling more comfortable setting healthy boundaries. Reagan, for his part, does start to apply himself more after this experience of rejection. And even though some of his business activities are still of questionable morality, I think that this could be an example of how you can handle rejection in a way that's not destructive. Applying yourself to something is a healthy way to handle being rejected. And I think that that is one of the things that this story is trying to teach. And Reagan does ultimately come to this point where he kind of has to reckon with himself. After he's been exposed as a fraud, he has this moment during the press conference where he's looking back at the history of this business and the nature of his relationship with Mob. And this is the first time that he's able to say to himself that he's been using Mob this whole time. And I think that this is the first time he's able to really understand why Mob needed space from him. You can see that he starts to hold Mob in a positive light, even though Mob is still distant from him. And of course, the two of them do end up reconciling here. Now, Reagan, even though he has admitted the truth to himself, is not quite ready to admit it to Mob here. And Mob allows him to avoid the hard conversation. There's a couple of open questions here. One is, why does Mob bail Reagan out of this predicament? And the other is, why does he continue to go along with this ruse that Reagan actually has abilities when Mob clearly knows that he really doesn't? I see two potential explanations that are not mutually exclusive from each other. One is that Mob may not be ready to completely let go of the idealized version of Reagan that he holds in his mind. Reagan has not only helped to relieve Mob from his isolation, but he's also come to his aid in a lot of different circumstances. Sometimes it's really hard to confront the truth of the unlikable parts of a person. All children go through this in their development, actually, with their parents. Children at some point have to realize that their parents are, in fact, flawed people, and they have to deal with all of the complicatedness with recognizing that your parent is a flawed person. Sometimes it can feel safer to maintain an idealized version of your parent, even though that's not the reality of who they are. And this can happen with anybody in your life, not just with a parent. I think because Reagan is a really important person to Mob at the end of the day, he may still want to hold on to the idealized version of him because he doesn't feel quite ready to deal with all of the complicatedness of the not so great parts of his master. The second potential explanation for what's going on here is simply Mob caring for Reagan. He's seen that he's been going through a really rough time with all of this negative press, even though it might be deserved. That would be hard for him to experience that. Even though he knows deep down that Reagan has been lying to him, he still cares about his master and would want to help him. And maybe that means choosing to focus on the positive aspects of his character and not go into the negative right now. I think that Mob choosing to take a break from Reagan is, in large part, what enables them to reconcile. Up until this rupture, there has been a lot of codependence in this relationship, as evidenced by the poor boundaries and the manipulative behavior when Mob starts pulling away. But as I've talked about before on this channel, It is possible for a relationship to recover from codependence if both people work on themselves. After they establish that they can be okay without each other, they can create a relationship that is much healthier than it was before. They will eventually have to confront the lie that's existed between them for the duration of their relationship, but they're not ready to do that yet. One because of shame and the other because of that idealization that I talked about earlier. So let's put a pin in them for right now and talk about a couple of other characters and how they deal with loneliness. One of the most interesting characters in the series, I think, is Serizawa. Just look at his backstory. Living in his mother's basement, playing video games all day, isolated, agoraphobic, no self-esteem, no community. Serizawa, I think, is kind of the archetype of a young man who is very vulnerable to going down the red pill pipeline. Researchers who have studied this type of radicalization have found that a lot of the men who enter these spaces do so because they are looking for a community. While radicalization is a matter of embracing an ideology, young men do not necessarily join misogynist or other extremist groups due to a specific conviction, but because they long for identity, community, protection, and excitement. While CLAW is not expressly a misogynistic organization, it is most definitely a fascist organization. And Serizawa's recruitment into CLAW is an example of what can happen when young men feel this isolated and misunderstood. They're extremely vulnerable to being brainwashed by anyone who professes to understand them or who offers some way of understanding their suffering. I'm not saying that any of this is an excuse for misogynistic or other types of hateful behavior. But if we don't make an effort to really understand what kinds of circumstances lead men to be radicalized in this way, then we can't find solutions to prevent this type of radicalization or interventions to de-radicalize men once this has happened. I think Mob Psycho 100 is really trying to teach a lesson about how to prevent men and boys from becoming violent and destructive by setting up this parallel between two dyads. You have Serizawa and Suzuki on the one hand, and Mob and Reagan on the other. While Reagan is not really the best role model, and he himself is also suffering from isolation and has yet to figure out a way to get out of it, he at least can offer healthy advice to Mob about how to understand himself and where he fits in the world. Reagan's philosophy is based in the principle that Mob isn't special because he has powers. He should not treat other people any differently. Other people shouldn't treat him differently. Just focus on being a good person. In contrast, Suzuki's worldview is based in hierarchy. He believes that he should dominate everything because he has powers and he's the strongest. Serizawa, for his part, doesn't really seem to care about world domination. He only cares that he is finally important to someone, that he has met other people who are also like him. But because he went directly from being isolated in this basement to being manipulated by this power-hungry evil man, he never got the opportunity to actually develop a full sense of self or figure out what his values are. That's why Mob offers to be his friend, because he knows that's what he needs. He needs to be known in a way that isn't imbued with violence. And Mob understands this about Suzuki as well. During their final battle, he says, "What you were missing was bonds." He begins to cry because Suzuki's loneliness reminds him of his own. In the moment when Suzuki thinks he is about to face death, he sees these memories of Sho's mother. She tries to tell him that he can't control other people's hearts with psychic powers, whereas he insists that he can. Going back to the research I referenced earlier about why men fall down the red pill pipeline, a lot of the study's subjects mention feeling vulnerable in some way, and kind of looking for a solution to their vulnerability. Commonly cited reasons for feeling vulnerable included dating issues, failed relationships, or being sexually inexperienced. What I extract from that is that there's a lot of fear of rejection or pain from being rejected. And that's a part of life. All of us have to build up the capacity to tolerate rejection. And it's hard, especially if you don't have community, and especially if you don't have anybody who ever taught you how to experience painful feelings. If a person does not have the capacity to tolerate the feelings associated with rejection, they will engage in a lot of tactics to try to prevent the rejection from happening, to try to prevent those feelings from coming up. And sometimes those tactics are deeply unhealthy. And not only that, but they ultimately don't work. There is no amount of power that exists in this world that can control how another person feels about you. And because of that, you will always be vulnerable to the possibility of disappointment. So if vulnerability is a given in life, how do you deal with it? Mob accepts that his powers cannot fix everything and states unequivocally that he is okay with that, while Suzuki realizes that he has been trying to control everything with his powers, going as far as to try to control people's hearts. And even though he tried so hard to control everything, his wife still left him, his son still hates him. And even if he had succeeded at world domination, he still would have been lonely, because power doesn't buy you friendship. Mob reminds Suzuki that he needs to apologize to his son. And he says, I also need to express myself to someone. And in that, he is joining Suzuki in his experience of being vulnerable. It's not exactly the same thing, apologizing to your kid on the one hand and on the other hand, confessing your feelings to the girl you have a crush on. It's not exactly the same, but what those two things have in common is vulnerability, because you cannot control how the other person is going to respond to you, whether they will accept what you're offering or if they'll reject it. That's terrifying that you can't control that response. But what this story keeps on leading us back to is the reality that there's really no escaping doing the hard thing. You can't use power to try to make things easier, to try to control how other people feel about you. You have to just do the hard thing. Let's talk a little bit about Serizawa's rehabilitation and transformation. When we see him in his suit in the office, he's incredibly nervous. He doesn't have his umbrella with him anymore, and this represents kind of letting go of the safety blanket. Suzuki's protection used to make Serizawa feel safe enough to venture out into the world, but he had to let go of that because ultimately it was not healthy for him. So without his safety blanket, we see the full extent of his anxiety coming through. He's such an interesting character because he's got this immense amount of power and yet is terrified of talking to a stranger. But that just brings home the point that even if you've got powers, there's some things that you have to come by them honestly. Learning social skills, making friends, gaining confidence, these are things that you can really only do by putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation, fumbling your way through it, and repeating that over and over again. I love watching Serizawa go through this process because the people around him are very patient with him. Yes, Reagan gets frustrated with him sometimes, but as a boss, he's very supportive of Serizawa's desire to go back to school, for example, because he knows it's beneficial for him to work on himself. In a supportive environment, Serizawa gets to try and fail over and over. And through that process, he gradually develops the sense of self that he never built before. And having people around him who are patient with him, that is an essential part of the process. That is community in practice. Okay, let's return to Mob and Reagan's relationship. Even though he's built a lot of confidence over the course of this story, Mob is struggling with a very deep polarization within himself. He still fears his own power, fears losing control. He's probably been carrying some amount of guilt or shame ever since the day he accidentally hurt his brother. Because of this fear, guilt, and shame, Mob has been keeping the part of himself that holds his unbridled power repressed. Ritsu says as he's running to reach his brother that the two of them don't really speak freely anymore ever since that accident. Mob's fear of his own power has inhibited him from being completely open with his emotions, thereby creating a sense of isolation. Even if you have friends, even if you have people in your life around you, if you don't ever say what you're truly feeling, that's still a version of being alone. This is the moment that Reagan knows he finally needs to come clean. His confession of who he really is the pinnacle of vulnerability, revealing the fact that I've been deceiving you for years. It comes at the risk of losing the relationship. But at the same time, it opens the possibility for a more authentic connection. And seemingly against all odds, the confession breaks through. Because Reagan again offers Mob what he needs to not feel alone. Reagan is effectively a mirror for Mob here. He's saying, there's this side of myself that I really don't like, and I've been keeping it hidden. But now I'm laying it out in the open. I'm accepting this as a part of myself even if I don't like it. And Mob also has this part of himself that he's been struggling to accept. He's been trying to keep it hidden, pressing it down. But what tends to happen in the psyche is that the more you try to press down certain parts of yourself, the stronger and the more desperate they get to kind of claw their way back to the surface. When Mob sees that Reagan is willing to put all of his ugliness on the table, he feels more free to do so himself, and the struggle within him finally ends. Now there's no longer a battle between which version of himself will take control, because both can integrate into the whole. This guy gets a seat at the table. There's this metaphor that's often used in internal family systems, which is one of the modalities of therapy that I use, of a conference table. So all of your parts get to have a seat around the conference table. And sometimes the work is getting some of the parts to crawl out from underneath the table. Some parts have been shut in the closet and they need to open the door and come out and sit down. But everybody gets to have a seat at the table. Despite all the destruction that each of them have caused, Reagan and Mob both accept each other fully. This story was never about trying to ascend to a higher and higher level of power to vanquish a foe. This story was always about confronting the darkness within you and learning that you can still be loved. In a world where so many people are preoccupied with the question, what if they reject me? Mob Psycho 100 is a story that asks, what if they don't? What if no matter how hard you try to push someone away, they continue to reach for you? What if you admit that you've been lying this whole time and your friendship isn't broken? What if you've never had a real job before and someone still gives you a shot? What if you've never done a push-up in your life, but a bunch of buff gym bros welcome you into their fitness club with open arms? What if you've got no rhythm, but you still get invited to karaoke? What if all your friends drive out to the middle of nowhere to camp with you on top of a mountain to support you and your weird obsession with aliens? What if your wife, who left you years ago, still cares about how you're doing? And if you do get rejected, what if you can be okay? That's the most powerful line in the whole series, I think. When Mob asks himself, what if we get rejected? And he answers, we'll be okay. I think it was the right choice not to show the scene between Mob and Tsubomi, because this story is not about that relationship. It's about this one, the one where men support each other, on their good days and on their bad ones. This is the model of what it looks like to deal with rejection in a healthy way. Cry your tears, have your feelings, and then keep moving forward. I wouldn't typically endorse the exact response Reagan gives Mob here because I think it leans a little too much towards look on the bright side a little too quickly, which can come across as dismissive. But in this situation, because of the lesson that this story is trying to tell, it may be the right choice to say, hey, these things happen. A lot of people get very stuck in the feelings associated with being rejected. They hold onto them very tightly and can kind of enter a victim state, feeling as though they were entitled to that relationship and can't move on with their life if they don't have it. But that's not healthy. By all means, feel your feelings about the rejection. It hurts, that's valid. But don't hold on to those feelings too tightly. Keep moving forward. Go to school, go to work, go for a run, spend time with your people. Keep working on yourself. Never stop growing. Men and boys need permission to experience feelings like this without being shamed for them. And they also need community to support each other with feelings and experiences like this. There are healthy pathways through pain that don't involve trying to control and dominate everything. And that is the lesson that Mob Psycho 100 brings home so beautifully and so well. Thank you all so much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Leave a comment letting me know your thoughts. Be sure you read the rules for engaging in the comment section, which are in the description box below. Let me know if you have any suggestions for other anime that you want me to cover. My name is Catherine. I am a licensed therapist, and this has been your weekly dose of nerd therapy.